afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Propagandacast Lehr with me, your host, Imperial Dane. Today's topic is base raiding. The act of raiding your opponent's base, striking it and looking for possibly weak targets inside of it to that way put pressure on your opponent and cause them to feel a lot less secure and maybe pressure them into making a bunch of mistakes. Overall, sort of some of the fundamentals, of course, of base raiding is A, raiding your opponent's base, obviously. It's not actually something that's practiced a lot, though betting companies want is actually a very common tactic. That is, you need to strike at your opponent's base, do some damage, then quickly retract, knocking out vital elements of infrastructure, just wiping units that are being low on health. It's still something that can, in several cases, be quite viable in companies too, though it has rather sort of slightly taking a turn down, in part because those units are extremely good at it in the early stages of the game, like flamethrower tanks that would just burn through the base in a matter of seconds and just win the game that way. So they sort of rather change up things like that. Rather means it's become a bit more difficult. But even then, you just look for easy targets to strike and sort of hit. But all things to keep in mind while you are base raiding, of course, is A, do you have a secure path to retreat there? Because you could commit to it, but then if you end up losing a tank or whatever you're sending in there, that's obviously not necessarily going to be worth it. So you have to be much more careful in how you do it, how you approach it, and of course that way sort of ensure you have a safe way of exit unless you're sort of really intending to hit some kind of super high priority target, which you're not afraid to lose a bit for. Other very good thing to keep in mind while base raiding, of course, is actually having a clear goal in mind, a clear target. So that way, again, you can just hit and then get out of there. Like, unless you're sort of striking at something at the edge of the base just to frustrate your opponent, you should generally have a clear goal in mind, something what you want to destroy, and then take it from there. Any sort of attempt just being too greedy there can then easily sort of backfire on you. So generally, the clearer the goal, the better for you as a rule of thumb. So it's very good to keep in mind while base raiding. And again, targets can be more easy to destroy structures. Ambulances, if they're the Americans, like that's an easy target just to hit, raid, force them to expend resources rebuilding it. Medic bunkers, if they're the Wehrmacht, not quite as easy to take down as say an ambulance, but still reasonably easy. And of course, units that are just depleted, almost ready to be wiped out, sneaking in there to just wipe a few of them can be quite useful for you. And of course, any sort of artillery units that might be a bit exposed, of course, are also valid targets. Another thing that's very good to keep in mind while base raiding is trying to keep in mind where your opponent's forces overall position. Can you, for example, make a clean strike at it, or it might require some kind of diversion or distraction to that way force them to commit elsewhere, keep them tied down as you then sort of make the raid, which again overall complicates things and of course increase the chance of things going a bit wrong. So those are of course very important things to keep in mind as well while setting up for your little base raid. And of course, using the correct units for it, of course, is also quite valuable. I mean, anti-infantry units in overall, like Centaurs, Austin, stuff like that, Panther 4s, T-34s can be quite useful. Quickly do a ton of damage, and then getting out heavy and slower stuff. Or assault guns generally tend to be not very well suited since they're like a turret, which tend to be very required in base raid operations. But they're also a little slower and have a harder time getting out, and particularly in the heavier stuff. Plus, they're just sort of more rare and overall valuable, so you don't generally want to commit your high value units as such like that. I mean, of course, a medium tank is still reasonably high value, but it's not, say, a Tiger tank or a King Tiger or whatever. So knowing what to commit to a base raid as well, I think is quite important when actually setting about doing it. But again, well executed base raids can actually achieve numerous goals. Again, one of them is just disruption, putting pressure on an opponent, but also just making them feel less safe within their base, and that's actually a pretty big one. Like, you can force your opponent to be a lot more cautious, a lot more nervous. You can usually begin dictating much more of the fighting, which is really just your advantage, because it really means you can just begin hitting wherever you want, and that can really just give you an edge long term as well versus your opponent. Hell, even short term, your opponent gets really nervous and skittish. So there's certainly benefits to just hitting your opponent's base, striking into it, and doing lots and lots of nasty damage. And again, if you sort of knock out vital infrastructure buildings, like say if you have an opponent take out his infantry company, you can basically disable all of his Panther 4s, forcing him to replace them. And right here, for example, we see a case of a Panther 4 raiding into his opponent's base to take out all of his opponent's sniper using the Panther 4. It's a very successful base raid. And of course, he knew that the snipers weren't retreating, and then could actually find a clear path to raid into the base to then murder the snipers. So in this regard, again, base raids can achieve some pretty potent results when executed correctly, and I think that's something it's worth keeping in mind. I mean, you shouldn't be doing it always, but depending on the situation, like for example, say your opponent's really digging in, say around here, but this is for example quite unguarded, the base is also quite free, you could consider then striking to the base instead of engaging your opponent's force head on, putting pressure, then maybe force them to defend their base, or just risk losing vital elements, even units that are retreating. So There are a lot of things to keep in mind when it comes to base rates, you know, and part of it is just to keep in mind it is an option, because again, it's not something that's practiced a lot, you know, in these days of companies too. But I still think, you know, it's a vital, well, not vital, but it's a valuable tactic and valid in several cases. Of course, it's not something you always should be doing, but when done correctly, it can be quite impactful to your opponent and can put quite severe pressure on them, psychological and just, you know, actual, you know, in-game pressure. So that is very much worth keeping in mind. You know, whether or not, of course, you should do it in the first place is another situation. Again, so it depends, you know, what's the disposition of your opponent's forces. As I mentioned, is there a clear path to the base, a reasonably clear one, and of course, can you cover the retreat? Because once you strike there, it's basically like striking a hornet's nest. They're going to strike back at you usually, unless they're like really caught up elsewhere. Of course, again, this is where diversions and distractions, all that can help, you know, tie down your opponent's attention as well elsewhere, making it even easier and then commit. Of course, that means you have to manage two very separate things, which of course carries its own risks. But I think that sort of overall covers sort of base rating, you know, the basics of it, how to get the most out of it, of course, you know, how to ensure you don't lose too much while doing it yourself. The overall counters of base rates, though, tend to be mines. For example, covering your base entrance with mines is a very good comment. Of course, always just keeping an eye out for your opponent is doing. Of course, not all opponents doing, but they are doing it. They're most likely going to try and scout out any interest around your base beforehand. And they might, well, they don't usually carry mines, but since again, if you do it, so there's generally not a lot, you know, for it. But again, if you are worried about it, if your opponent's done at least once, consider mining the entrance to your base, as that really covers, that makes it much harder for them to base raid and can allow you to punish it very hard. So that sort of, I think, sort of covers the sort of immediate counters to base raids for those that are curious. So this is Imperial Dane signing off. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, subscribe, like, share, comment on it. I'm off until another time with another video. Cheers, everybody.